This is Women in Linux. Welcome to the Women in Linux podcast, exposing women to information and careers in technology.
Thanks for joining Women in Linux with your hosts Tamika Reed and Dee Parler. This installment of our CTO series, we're chatting with Val Bercovici, CTO of SolidFire. Hey, Val.
Hey there, Dee. Hey, Tamika.
How you doing?
Doing fantastic. So thrilled to finally be on.
I know it's been a minute, so we're gonna kick things off with a little bit about you telling us a little bit about yourself, and a little bit about one being acquired by NetApp from SolidFire.
Cool. So I've been actually at NetApp. I'm a veteran of NetApp for almost 18 years now. But the last 8 of those, and I hate to admit that sometimes, it's not cool in the Valley to be at one employer that long. But I have done different things, and that's what's kept me employed. I get bored easily, so they let me do different things every 3 or 4 years. And I had a lot of fun, actually, for about 2 of those terms. For about 8 years, I was directing most of the research investments out of the big R in the R&D division of engineering at NetApp. And a lot of those were what we call today next-generation topics. So they were... cloud computing was pretty young and new back in 2008 or so. Even big data analytics wasn't really a common everyday thing. And some of the new development styles that had begun to emerge back then, those are all fairly new topics that I got a chance to research. And around 2015, around Christmas time, it was a bit of a Christmas present, we announced the intention to acquire SolidFire. And now it's kind of like, set off a light bulb in my head saying, hey, now I can finally apply all this research into practice, because it turns out that a lot of SolidFire's business is in next generation data centers. It's a lot of cloud service provider deployments and a lot of these next generation workloads. So it's been a lot of fun jumping into a startup, having to sort of accelerate the pace of, how I do business. So it's one of those careful what you wish for things. You always want to work for a startup again. Then you forget how fast, the action is and the activity is there. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's been about a year now. We just came up to our 1-year anniversary of announcing the acquisition. We closed it a couple of months later. So come February 1st, I think, in a week or so, it'll actually be the formal first anniversary of the acquisition.
So how are you feeling after the acquisition, and you're getting a chance to, I don't want to say dust off some old skills, but you get a chance to implement some new knowledge that you actually may have acquired over the years as well, too?
Yeah, it has been a wild ride. And what's been cool is 1 year in, we've had a couple of reorgs already, obviously. But what we've really tried to do is kind of merge the best of the enthusiasm and energy that SolidFire and their brand, which always punched above their weight in like OpenStack conferences and so forth, bring some of that positivity of the brand over to the NetApp side, while, implementing a lot of the processes that's made NetApp, about $6 billion company, and some of the processes at scale. Being able to merge those two things has been, a non-trivial exercise, but it's just a real lesson in how business is done today, how you merge the best of some internal organic development with some of the best of what we call inorganic development you kind of acquire from the outside.
That's a good lead-in into one of our second questions is what's making that transition, from SolidFire, and also making the transition of what you used to do and now becoming more into a leadership role. What leadership strategies and skills and even technical skills had you had to fine-tune or actually, I guess, reorganize in your head?
So the technical skills is probably the easy part of that question. I've always been a very curious, especially technically curious kind of guy, and I've always loved exploring new technologies and then, where they're appropriate, trying to map them to what I've been doing. So that's kind of, I've been carrying on a lot of what I've done in my prior role in terms of researching new technologies, and there's certainly no rest to the change of pace that we've seen in new technologies. I kind of have this theory that Ray Kurzweil from Google now likes to say, which is the pace of change in technology is exponential now. It's not even linear or anything else. So just expecting a lot of change. And we've seen that with, things like artificial intelligence now being almost a mainstream thing that IT departments have to contend with, even though it's more of a science fiction thing a few years ago. So the technology side hasn't been too difficult. And I actually have been using Twitter, for example, as a great way to be able to learn about new things. Instead of trying to have this sort of ego stat of having a lot of followers and very few people that I follow,
Right.
I actually aggressively follow as many people as I can. And one of my habits has been, you read about some new technology and there's usually a company or an open source project associated with it. So you Google that, you find out maybe the organization or the main Twitter handle behind that project. But then quickly, Twitter is very good at saying, you know what, behind this company or behind this project is either like a lead developer or the founder or CTO of this new startup. And I pretty quickly follow those individuals, and I often sort of unfollow the brand or the corporate account, corporate handle. And obviously, by following the individuals, you get a bit of a heads up on what they're working on before it becomes an official company thing. And you get a bit of their personality as well, and you can kind of decide for yourself whether they're credible as individuals. And certainly, you can assess kind of the heads up of what they're working on. But I've kind of, organically curated my Twitter feed that way over the years. And it's been, by and large, my number one source of learning and new information on the technology side. So that's my big advice to everyone is find a way to, systematically absorb a lot of new things. And I don't necessarily have to advocate Twitter as the only way to do that. It's just my personal favorite way to do that. So the technology...
You said that.
Exactly, yeah. So I think the technology side's been, for me, pretty straightforward. The leadership skills and the management skills, are an ongoing effort for me. For people that have worked for me, they know I'm not necessarily a very good manager because I distinguish leadership and management as two separate skill sets. For me, management is a lot of administrative things. It's doing dreaded focal reviews. It's approving expense reports or travel requests or things of that nature. So that's not my favorite thing. You can even tell from my tone of voice. It's just not what I look forward to.
It went down.
Exactly. But the leadership side is something that I'm pretty passionate about. And I'm a big believer in, the golden rule of treating people the way you want to be treated and leading by example. So that's something that, I do invest a lot of time in. And I know we've got some mentorship questions down the pipe here, but I actually try and get mentorship from other leaders, and I follow great leaders and again, model what they do and try and emulate as much of that as I can, within my own team. There's one guy I sort of have to mention out of just, respect and out of the fact that he's taught me a lot over the years. And that's a gentleman by the name of Tom Mendoza, who was an early founder of NetApp, became a worldwide sales leader. And he's actually on the board of directors. He's a vice chair of our board of directors. And he spends most of his time right now, even though he was an ace, salesperson and surprisingly almost stealthily technical. He doesn't really spend a lot of time on corporate activities or certainly on technical things. He delivers a lot of talks to all sorts of organizations around the world, West Point and other companies and other organizations, just on leadership skills and just on mentorship. So he's taught me a lot over the years. I've known him for, almost 18, 19 years that I've been at NetApp. And modeling people like him, I think his handle on Twitter is Tom Mendoza Talks. Modeling people like him is the way I've learned a lot of leadership and some management skills, but mostly leadership skills.
And speaking of your leadership and mentoring, out of those 18 or 19 years, you can break it down to one, or if you have several, that's fine. But what are some of those skill sets or ideas that you have that you just at your core that you're just never going to get rid of? Like, what do you hold on to the most?
So I think, it might be a big cliche or trite right now, but, being passionate about what you do is a really important leadership skill. It's very self-serving because I believe firmly it tends to help you in your own career path. But when you have that passion and you articulate it, you can be a very outbound person and you can do it via just at a lot of parties or a lot of seminars and deliver keynotes, or you can just be passionate in other ways. But articulating and sharing your passion for what you're doing is really important because that passion becomes infectious within your team, within your peers, even some of your competitors. That's an important thing. And Tom always likes to say, it's more important that people know that you care than what you actually know. And so the fact that you're actually communicating on a regular basis, You're learning about the people that you work with on a personal level, because at the end of the day, we are all people. We're not just, employee IDs on an ADP paycheck or pay stub role. So learning about the individuals you work with, everyone's got a common sense of, lowest common denominator in terms of what we share in common. So, we either have kids or we have dogs or, we pay taxes, or there's lots of things we can chat about and find out a little bit more about ourselves and find out what motivates us. The personal side is a really important part of leadership, I find, and the passion. I'd say those are the two things that I've clung to and that have kind of served me well in the teams I've worked with.
And that's something that we try to do, at least, for me, in Women in Linux, I try to display as much passion as I can. And you earlier you talked about, Twitter, and, my group always like, you're the poster of the year. Like, I post stuff, like I'm on Twitter, I'm on whatever newsletter, whatever you can think of. I'm always constantly reading and seeing, like, okay, what's going to be the next, the next development, where a job's going to be positioned at. Or, how can you nurture yourself? How can you take your basic skill sets that you have? Because I think everybody has a set of basic skills, and then put something on top of that. And what do you put on top of that to move into a position? Like for me, system administration, storage administration, and all that, those things are great, but I call those fundamentals. And then what can you put on top of that to add, to the layer of the cake, and then add some icing and maybe a cherry on top, so you can move into another position that could possibly come open, and so you keep yourself kind of fluent. And with that, you kind of develop your own set of leadership skills inside yourself. Like, what am I going to do next, and who am I looking at in the future? Who's a good person to mentor me, and so forth. And speaking of, how would you go about mentoring someone who's coming up, in particular a woman that wants to get into this field or break into being a CTO? How would you mentor them into a position such as yourself?
Yeah, one of my favorite questions I think you've asked so far. So several mentors have helped me greatly over the years. And maybe one of the things from my own personal experience is that mentorship is kind of, I wouldn't say marriage at all, but it's an important one-on-one relationship. And so the key thing is, it's okay to have multiple mentors, but I think maybe this is the most basic advice, is let's not, try not to mentor too many people if you're the mentor. If you're getting advice from a few people, pick and choose who you want to get advice from. But if you're getting advice from about 5 or more people, it's likely to become a little bit, contradictory after time. So keep those relationships focused. Try and obviously pick people that you really want to, you want to emulate, you want to be over time. But pick them not just on career basis, but certainly on the personality fit. People are going to be, busy over time with very varied schedules. So you want to have some kind of alignment in terms of schedules. You want to have some kind of alignment in terms of perhaps even a vertical industry focus. Some common bonds, are important to have. And what I've learned in mentoring people is nothing beats experience. Despite the fact that technology changes over time, there's a lot of just core basic career principles in terms of being visible, which is why I think social media is a fantastic, modern tool for that. You don't have to be a best kept secret anymore. There's a lot of meritocracy and some kind of equalization of access in social media. If you've got, a lot of knowledge to impart, social media is a great platform for you to be able to share that and be visible. So that's a really good thing. But there's also, some really core business principles that really haven't changed over time. And so just being able to learn some key principles around, what really drives product demand, what really drives go to market, how you can focus, for example. I see a lot of startups coming to me and having a very basic common question of, there's a lot of features I can add to my product, or there's a lot of, particular customers in one segment that I can serve. but it's a narrow segment. So what should I do? And when I was young, that always seemed to be a very complicated question for me to answer because I was tempted to do both. And doing both is an aspirational thing, but in reality, you really can't, particularly with limited resources. So I've actually learned there's, in my mind, a clear answer to that. You kind of want to go deep when you go into a new venture as a startup, or when you start some kind of new project. You want to go deep into a targeted area first, and pick and choose your targeted area carefully. But you want to go deep before you go broad in a lot of cases. So those are the kinds of things that I've learned over the years. Some business lessons through experience, clearly some management and leadership and career lessons as well through experience. But being able to have a platform for your passions and being able to apply some core business principles, those are the top things I've learned out of both being a mentor and a mentee.
You're listening to Women in Linux. So Val, we've spoke about diversity in tech before. What strides or changes have you made personally, or what strides has NetApp made?
So yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about. And it's only because I've noticed there's a real kind of gap between the regular corporate world, where I've had, a good share of female peers and female managers and people who reported to me. And in the corporate world, by and large, I think, a female employee or, someone from a minority or so forth is exactly no different than pretty much any other employee you kind of get. But in the tech world, you definitely do notice an imbalance, particularly a gender imbalance, if nothing else. And that's something I think is just a shame for a number of reasons. It's unjust, clearly to just qualified female employees and applicants for all sorts of positions. But the way I try to explain it to a lot of business leaders who typically tend to be white and typically tend to be male is that it's bad business. and I firmly believe that. I'm very emphatic about both counts. On the bad business side, one of the most tangible proof points I have is when you attend an industry, technology industry conference. By and large, if the keynotes are full of just, as I like to describe some of the problems with imbalance on my own teams, if they're full of middle-aged white dudes, the whole keynote tends to be full of platitudes and tends to be kind of boring, and people tune out and they jump on Facebook or Twitter and they're almost not really paying attention to what's being said. But the moment you inject some energy in terms of any kind of diversity, whether it's gender diversity, ethnic diversity, just general ability and so forth, you find that the whole tone of the keynote takes on like a whole different kind of slant. And I've seen that, again, just using conferences because they're public events as examples. I've seen that in panels as well, when you see a woman moderating it, or, women or minorities actually in the mix of panelists. The standard deviation, sorry to get mathematical and geeky, but the standard deviation of the tone and of the topics just gets much wider automatically, and it becomes, for me, just a much more engaging session then and there. I just believe that, having a monotonous culture or this monoculture, if you've heard that term described in the past, is it's just a bad thing. If you have a security hat on, monoculture is just a recipe for disaster, because once a particular security vulnerability penetrates a very homogeneous technology architecture, it pretty much has access to everything. And that kind of concept applies throughout all of technology, and I find throughout all of life. Any bio major will tell you a diverse gene pool is the healthiest gene pool. So I just firmly believe in that. And what I've done is I've actually held up, a lot of recruiting processes within my own team to make sure that before we make hiring decisions, we actually have a truly diverse set of candidates in place. And, if you know anything about corporate hiring practices, particularly for public companies, they do tend to really ebb and flow based on the quarterly results. So when companies sort of, publish positive, neutral to positive quarterly results, existing hiring plans typically are in place. But when companies publish unexpectedly, perhaps low results, or they guide low for the next quarter or two, then all sorts of headcount you might have had kind of, disappears, or certainly is up for grabs. And so it's a risky proposition. It's a risky proposition in the corporate world for publicly traded companies to, really delay hires to have a more balanced candidate pool. but it's a risk I've assumed because I believe over the long term, it's the right thing to do, as an individual, as a person. And more importantly, it's definitely the right long-term decision for a company. So those are kinds of things we've done. And again, it's not something that is an easy thing. Walking the walk on diversity is much harder than talking the talk. But at the end of the day, there's no question, as you look at some of the leaders in our industry, whether they're some of the brand names, whether, Facebook and Google, Amazon, or so forth, or some of the suppliers to those companies, by and large, I find that, the more women are involved and the more minorities are involved in those companies, the more successful they are.
Well, thank you so much for taking the risk and being so self-aware about what's needed in the marketplace. As I was listening to you, I was laughing because Tam and we attended OzCon last year, and it was a great experience, and it was a very diverse experience, and the keynote speaker was a Black woman, and the keynote started out with basically a hip hop artist, and she's a PhD. What is she? Is she a what kind of scientist is she, Tam?
She's a PhD. She went to Cornell. Her name is Samus, and so she actually in her opening, she actually talks about tech, but from a rap perspective. So that's how she opened up. So it was actually pretty cool. And so in the audience, the crowd was like,
what is going on? They were like, what is
so
this?
So basically, I think she came out with I can't remember where the gun comes from. I want to say something like Doom or something. It's something like Doom or something like that. I can't remember where the gun comes from per se, but anyway, she did 2 songs and she came out with the gun, and everybody's like, I don't know. But what was funny about that was, not only was that funny, what was funny about that is the next speaker that came after her was confused. He didn't know how to continue with what he had to go. He's like, well, how do you follow up after that? And I'm like, you don't. You do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get out there and speak. But he couldn't ever really pull it together, so he was kind of off his whole speech. And I laughed and I tweeted that out, and everybody was like, well, how are you supposed to follow up to hip hop off of that? No one's going to understand. And it cracked me up, because what it did was it took people out of their element. It took them out of their norm. It took them out of their comfort zone, for those 5 minutes, and it shook everyone up. And the music was intentionally loud. It was loud.
Oh, it was blaring.
It was blaring loud, and everybody was sitting there looking like, I don't know. Do we cheer? Do we not cheer? Are we supposed to clap? Can we get up? No. Do we sit down? I don't know. It was just so many things, and I myself was cracking up. I was like, this is hilarious.
Oh, Val, you should. I mean, it looked like you just came out and threw a bucket of ice water on the crowd. And me and Tam just sat there and just kind of giggled to ourselves, because they had this coffee and they're like, we weren't ready.
I'm going to look that up on YouTube now. You got me really curious.
You have to. It was so awesome.
I'll send it to you. I'll send you the link. It's OzCon 2016 in Austin, and I'll send you the link so you could just see. They didn't pan to the crowd, but we were sitting in the crowd, and it was totally funny, because I was just like, well, for me, it's like, so what's next? Or this is different. Okay, all right. And then he comes out and he's like, hey.
Well, she's going to have a new Twitter follower if I don't follow her already, but I'm so glad you picked that example, because that's textbook, right?
Music. Yeah, she's Samus Music, and everything, and all her raps are like geeky tech raps about gaming, and they're just really, really quirky and awesome, and it was hilarious. Gosh, it has me in tears over here. It was so funny.
Yeah, so she sounds like the perfect poster child of, an example of mixing things up. The one thing we know for sure is everyone in the audience wasn't, just looking at their phones and passing time. They were probably, completely like you guys were saying. They're wondering what's going on here. How do I react? But they were paying attention. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, they were. So say you've been in the field for 5 years, and you're doing DevOps. What skill shifts should you shift your focus on to become a CTO or step into a leadership role?
So one of the things around the C-level role is that you've got to understand the business. And, a lot of people say that, but I think one of the simplest ways, not necessarily quickest ways, to understand the business is to go and do many of the key functions, perform that. So not necessarily, some of the back office stuff in terms of accounting or administration or HR. Those are kind of foundations for actually running a business, but the front-facing things. So go out there and actually try and sell the product for a while. If you really want to be brave, go and live on commission for a quarter or a year or something like that, and really feel some of the pain and some of the rewards of selling a product. Go out there and market it. See what it's like to try and address sort of multiple audiences, not necessarily just one customer, but multiple audiences with a single budget, a single messaging framework, or just a single outbound plan for social media and marketing and all sorts of other vehicles to reach customers. Go out there and try and manage a product, and then try and be all things to all people when you have, again, different sales teams from different accounts requesting different features. And you've got to figure out which is a subset of features that will best serve the market segment you want to address. When you get out there and conduct these different roles, you're able to get, if not a 360, then at least like a 270-degree view of a business. And that gives you, just the all-around rounding to really take on a C-level position. And then I think, once you have that grounding to take on a C-level position, back to, one of my old bits of advice is find your passion. And if your passion is technology, as in my case, then apply the passion to that rounded out experience. And, you've got the ability to qualify and actually, execute the job well.
I go back to, I read the book, The Phoenix Project, and it actually gives you empathy about what's going on in each department, what challenges that they're facing. So I definitely agree. So we spoke about storage administrator in college. Some fields are not taught in college, and storage administration is one of those fields. How do you incorporate into a college student or boot camp that is a viable career?
Yeah, we mentioned earlier on, this is one of my favorite rant topics. A couple of things going on here is, storage admin was an important career when I started at this company, at NetApp, about 18 long years ago. But in 18 years, that's about 3 or 4 lifetimes in technology terms. A lot of things have changed. And one of the core things is that from a product perspective, a lot of it used to be manual storage administration tasks. 15 years ago, 10, even 5 years ago, have been by and large highly automated within products and solutions themselves. So the whole definition of what a storage administrator is, if not radically changed, has probably kind of evolved or gone away, evolved in a Darwinistic sense over time, where it's really focusing on the data and the value of the data more than just the metal or the silicon that stores the data. And in colleges today, I think it's actually, even though they've done us a disservice in the past by not focusing some of the curricula, I guess, on storage administration per se, today, I think it's really important to look at what colleges are teaching and how they're teaching it. And by and large, you've got Amazon credits for AWS or Azure credits from Microsoft. I'm not sure if Google has as an aggressive, university or college program, but you've got a lot of cloud credits at your disposal. And what college students are being taught nowadays is that IT is a consumable. It's not necessarily, a practitioner skill set where you have to roll up your sleeves and build it all from the ground up anymore. So I think that's a good lesson. I think it's kind of indicative of the maturity of the technology, and as it's evolving, consuming a lot of the basic technologies we grew up with is more important than building them. And it's a really important skill set, I think, for enterprises all over the world to look at. There's a lot of stereotypes around millennials and IT as a service and consumerization of IT. but it is a reality of a lot of new college grads coming out of college. And there was a cool stat I saw that's probably a year and a half old right now, but it's probably around the end of 2015. The Department of Labor had essentially recognized that millennials were now the small majority of the entire workforce. And pretty soon, that small majority is not necessarily going to be the rank and file. It's going to be a lot of the middle management and leadership layers of most organizations. So really tuning our whole mentality around IT as a consumable, and what can we do with all that data as opposed to how do we store it first and protect it, and how we can apply it to the cool modern tech trends of real-time predictive analytics and some AI on top of that, and visualization through VR, AR, and all the amazing IoT applications out there. That's, I think, a lot more important skill set to focus on than just some of the lower level minutia of managing bits and bytes.
So what I'm hearing from you is take off all the layers of what we do to protect storage or even handle storage, and remove the constraints, and say let's dive in and rip it apart to see how we can use it here, how we can use it there, how we can use it in trucks or cars or anything. Just even maybe how you even come to work, like how your day is at work, like analyzing your day at work, how you sit at your desk, or the time that you spend learning. How much time do you spend actually doing your job versus learning your job, and so forth. And that's what I hear.
I like your expression, how can I use this a lot? Because that's really the question we should all be asking ourselves. That's, at the end of the day, I always kind of like to pretend I'm a CEO at a company. And if I'm a CEO at a company, the last thing I care about is the plumbing of my infrastructure. Plumbing is important, when a toilet backs up, but that's fortunately not a common occurrence. So what I really care about is how I can use all these investments I've made. How can I use all my investments in IT, and I don't really care at a low-level detail what they are? How can I use it to understand my customers better, to understand my competition better, to understand the legal framework I operate under or the regulatory framework I operate under? And then, of course, how can I understand it to get more customers? How can I understand it to deliver even more value to my customers so I can charge them more? Those are the really high-level executive top-down questions. And the good thing about technology today is that we can answer those questions, without having to dive into the low-level details that are just highly automated now.
So you touched on this a few minutes ago on machine learning, AR, VR, and AI. How, as SolidFire continues, you're in your year, how have you gotten ahead of this technology? Like, it's here, it's not coming, it's here. So how have you gotten ahead of that in terms of, the people that you work with or mentor or so forth and so on, and yourself? How have you gotten ahead of learning this technology so that you can continue to acquire new customers or keep the customers that you have?
Yeah, I love that question. And again, this goes back to the fact that in NetApp, before even acquiring SolidFire, we reached a certain size that we could actually afford what I still think is a luxury of a dedicated research team. We call them ATG, the Advanced Technology Group. And they've come up with a whole bunch of interesting sort of academically inspired research projects that we've been able to apply to our business, our day-to-day business. And some of that started, for example, with us realizing that we were, an IoT and a big data company before those two terms were cool, because over the years, the company's been in business about 20 plus years. We've actually deployed millions of storage controllers out in the field worldwide. And I think numbers we can still track show that there's over 1 million plus systems actively still in production. And they report telemetry to us. They report, what the week has been like if there's been no critical events. What's, the temperature been like in a data center, how many IOs we've served out to various storage clients and so forth, what kind of storage networks we've plugged into, a lot of metadata, anonymized metadata about a customer's environment. And of course, when there is an incident, so maybe there's been a data center power incident, or maybe there's been a drive failure or a controller failure, or maybe a spike in activity, that also gets reported out of sequence as well, out of like a weekly cadence. So we've collected a giant data warehouse, and nowadays you'd call it a data lake, over the past 20 years. And it's been one of these exponentially increasing volumes of data curves that we've had over the years. And at first we just sat back and looked at it and said, you know what, it's good to have this in case we need to look it up again for some kind of support call. But pretty quickly, I'd say right around 8 years ago, when we started looking at big data as a topic, we realized we were sitting on a gold mine of information, a gold mine of data. And if we started correlating all this data with what else we knew about the customer, we could start to be very, very reactive in terms of getting them answers to their support calls much more quickly than otherwise. Wouldn't have to put them on hold or defer the case for a day and then come back and look at it again. We could give them more real-time answers. We could also get very, very predictive around, what are all sorts of customers in North Carolina observing? And is there something about the quality of the power feed or the temperatures in the data centers there that's different than customers in Minneapolis and maybe different than customers in San Diego? Or let's take a look at all of our oil and gas customers, and particularly ones with systems deployed out, in oil rigs in the middle of the ocean. And, what are some of the commonalities there? And we can actually report back to customers proactively, guess what, out of the 1,010 customers that are in oil and gas that are NetApp customers, SolidFire customers, you are number 27 in terms of your storage efficiency. You're number 33 in terms of, what the power and cooling consumption is. You're like number 100 in terms of security vulnerabilities or something. So some of these lists you want to be high on, some of these lists you want to be low on. But, going from, I think, very quickly reactive business answers to proactive business information has been one of the key trends that we've gotten good at over the years. And what we're on the cusp of right now is getting like super intelligent. And that's where we're unleashing a lot of these machine learning and deep learning algorithms on this data. And I can't say we have a lot of real world examples yet, but some of the things we're hoping to do is get into like some super deep context about what people are doing and correlate a lot of information at once, and then being able to apply some of these machine learning algorithms at it. And some of that is really cool because we're not necessarily having to develop all that expertise in-house. We are Amazon partners, we are Azure partners and Google partners. So we have this unique, and this is part of maybe getting ahead of myself, the shameless plug aspect, but we have this unique ability to, overcome data gravity and expose all of our data to some of the amazing analytics in the public hyperscale cloud platforms without moving all of our data there, and being able to take advantage of some of the AI services and the IoT SDKs that they've exposed, and combine that. And we have some pretty, big ambitions for what we can do in this next phase of, I call it, the next phase of analytics after reactive and proactive and applying data to a lot of, sensors out there in the IoT world. The next major evolution is how can you add, human-like levels of expertise and context and intelligence and get to even more, valuable business services, valuable advice for customers, valuable information for customers.
This sounded like a keynote.
It is going to be one of my upcoming keynotes. It's very current and modern, which is what I like about it. It's based on reality, but it's also applying what we're doing right now in terms of what will come in the future.
You're listening to Women in Linux.
I know you give talks and you're traveling around the world, and you just gave us your keynote, but how do you know what talk you want to give and the research behind it to such a broad audience? Because there are so many different conferences, and there's a very, very broad audience when you're giving as a keynote. There's a very broad audience. So how do you determine what to speak about and what and what's going to reach the person so they don't hop on Facebook or Twitter?
Oh, yeah, a great sort of final question. I'm a big believer in that expression, perfection is the enemy of the possible. So I don't try to be all things to all people. I just pick a topic, again, that I'm passionate about. And one of the senses I've realized over the years, one of my instincts about, I'm passionate about a useful topic or a popular topic is that it circles back to, I think, what I started with, which is a source like Twitter. I just, having curated my feed over time, I can kind of tell, for things that interest me, there's an interesting enough community. It's either big enough or broad enough or lucrative enough or diverse enough, a community that has a similar passion or interest. Kubernetes is one of those things we haven't mentioned right now, but I'm a huge believer in Kubernetes because I love containers as a developer. I thought that was a much better packaging format than a VM. And I love dynamic scheduling. I'm always a big believer in cost-based instead of rule-based algorithms. So things like the Kubernetes community really just speaks to my propeller head geekiness. So, you kind of associate yourself with these communities, and then you realize in just listening to what they talk about, what's valuable to them. And in my mind, that probably indirectly influences what I want to talk about, but you can be pretty methodical about it if you want to as well, and use all the Twitter analytics tools or the LinkedIn analytics tools and see what people are literally, tweeting about, what their sentiment is, and use that to determine what your topics are as well. So those are my kind of guideposts.
Awesome. So this is the end of our podcast, and I know you. I know you had mentioned something about a shameless plug, but now it's in full context. Anything, anyone, any person, or what have you, or thought. Here's your chance to do a shameless plug on that person. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Awesome. So I'll just leave you sort of a brand name for the portfolio products I talked about, those hybrid cloud products that eliminate data gravity, and we call it the NetApp Data Fabric. And if you Google that, hopefully you'll get access to not just some of the marketing material, but some of the cool technical reports, GitHub projects related to it, and some of the cool new services that we're offering now, because we're treating it as a platform. It's an open platform that third parties and developers can develop on top of, and we're seeding that platform with a couple of cool new services we built on top of it ourselves.
We'll make sure all this information gets out, and we'll put everything inside of, and as far as people following you on Twitter, your Twitter handler. If you have an Instagram, we'll look that up as well too. We thank you for today. We thank you for coming on. We thank you for all your information in terms of where the storage administrator is. Those that are in storage as a storage administrator, what's the next level, and also what's the next level for students who are in school, how they can become or look and analyze data and actually use your third-party resources as well too.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I love the questions, and hopefully I can come back on and we can follow up.
Yeah, we can, and we will.
Yes, as soon as your schedule opens up for us and you carve some time for the girls, just say, this is for the girls, and we'll be there for you.
Perfect. It's a great way to think of it. And yeah, every 3 to 6 months there's always news, so let's stick to that kind of cadence.
Cool beans.
Sure will.
Awesome.
All right, Val. Thank you so much.
Great chatting with you both today.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Women in Linux podcast. Women in Linux is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization created to get women involved in the field of IT using Linux as a foundation. You can connect with Women in Linux through social media at Women in Linux on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. To join weekly meetups, go to meetups.com/Women in Linux. For more information and to connect with Women in Linux, go to www.womeninlinux.com.